Hi, friends. Hi. It's been a minute. Welcome to the Stash Challenge 2026. And this video, you may have noticed, is for May and June. I missed a video. Not the end of the world. It's okay. So I'm combining May and June into this video. And it is now July, and missing the video, I guess missing posting video for May, getting into June, realizing that happened, and now moving into July, realizing that we are halfway through the year, over halfway through the year, and started getting me thinking about sort of where things are at halfway through the year, looking at how things started with the beginning of this year with the Stash Challenge, with my own goals, and with how things are going with the Stash Challenge itself, and just sort of starting to ruminate and think about, are there any changes that I want to start making? And so I'm starting to think about what sorts of things do I want to do next year. And it's when you're looking at goals and looking at your progress that you've made towards your goals, when you're doing a sort of reassessment, and since we're at the halfway point, that's a nice time to do a reassessment. It's nice to look at what has been successful, what has helped me move towards my goals, and what are those barriers in the way. And so for these videos, I really like doing these videos, but looking at like what was the barrier that stops me from getting these out in a timely manner. And it's really, I think, this portion here, which I've already changed. So last year, it was more like a vlog where I was sharing my knitting and purchases and works in progress, and made these videos really long. And so I kind of cut that to where this is just really the informational portion about the Stash Challenge. And it really helped to shorten the videos, which seems to make them do better. But now I'm starting to think, where I want to go from here. So we'll see what happens. I may start making some changes this year to play around with the videos. All that being said, it's a good time even to think about even your goals, and your stash when you made those goals for yourself in the beginning of the year to use stash. How are things going and what are your barriers? So I want to get right into, so I'll scoot over a little bit because I might need more room, putting up the information for our group stats and where we are right now. And as you can see, the numbers are still going down. And that is actually typical so far with the data that I have. We are still using more of our stash yarn than the previous year. We have more people involved. So that's going to be one of the reasons. But it made me think about like my own personal stash usage. Am I also seeing a trend downwards, and how significant is that? And since it's halfway, I was thinking a lot about halfway. So you can start thinking about your stash yarn usage. Are you halfway? Have you used, so for example, I know how much yarn I used last year from my stash. So comparing that to, am I halfway to that point right now to match that? And I am a little behind on that. So just giving me an idea of where I am. Am I also know how much new yarn I got last year, and am I halfway through that? I'm not. So thinking about things like that. Um, Also thinking about, then what are the barriers? Is it still my goal to use my stash yarn? Maybe you're satisfied with how much stash yarn you've used. I know in the Discord channel, people have talked about um that they haven't been using maybe as much stash yarn because they purchased yarn earlier this year that they wanted to use for a project. Um, or maybe they're working on a bigger project like a sweater or something, and they don't have a sweater's quantity necessarily in their stash, maybe of one color. So thinking about things like that, and maybe readjusting, like what are your goals then for the rest of the year. So for me, in the beginning of the year, I wanted to use up all of the stash yarn, all of the new yarn I bought last year, or at least that same amount. And I'm not even halfway there, so maybe adjusting that a little bit. I have used yarn from that new purchase, so maybe I could make a goal for myself to maybe use one or two more skeins from that newly purchased yarn from last year. So just taking this time halfway through the year to sort of think about where you are, where you want to be. Are your goals the same as they were in the beginning of the year? And that's okay to change them. And then what barriers are keeping you from moving towards your goals? So things to think about. Then next up, I want to show our year to date numbers for May and June. And it looks really good, especially compared to last year, that we are, as a group, using up more stash yarn than we did last year. The last thing that I wanted to make sure that I shared, since we have double the images to share, we'll go ahead and look at the heavyweight lifters, the top 10 heavyweight lifters for May and June. We're seeing some people hanging out there at the top, and not a whole lot of change. So, we have that huge like burst out of the gate in January, and people using lots of their stash, and then holding those top positions. As now things are slowing down, they're not using as much stash yarn, and so their numbers aren't going up, but it's such a high number that we're all trying to catch up to that. And then here we are then with the long distance runners. So things are still moving along, and I'm hopeful that as the cooler weather starts to think about showing up, I know we only just started summer, but as we're thinking ahead to sweater weather coming up, maybe more of our making will happen. But maybe not, because if we're making sweaters and we don't have it in our stash, my other thought was maybe we're using up all of our stash. Is that happening? Uh, all of that is totally fine. So then, and then the last thing I wanted to share, we have our challenges for the challenge schedule. I crossed off the Shark Week challenge because I just didn't come up with any ideas for that. I was starting to ruminate, and then it just all left, and the video didn't happen, and the next challenge I didn't work on. So we're still in the Tanks and Tees challenge, the Summer Tops challenge. And I only just started my summer top. So we're doing, and this is why I like to have these lengthy challenges, because even for me, I don't get things started um, in a timely manner. So that's still going on through the end of July. If you're needing some sort of motivation, trying to pull out some stash yarn to work on a summer top. I'm also thinking about next year as far as the challenges go. The Shark Week challenge might change to some sort of halfway point challenge, and that may revolve more around goal making. And so, kind of in line with what I was talking about, I think I might come up with something for next year for us to work on our goals for halfway through the year. But that'll be a next year thing. I hope that all of your making, all of your summer activities are enjoyable, or at least as many as can be in the heat. And as we are moving forward, if you have any questions, concerns, ideas for the next year, on things that we can do for the stash challenge for next year, maybe there's something that's a barrier for you to participate and you want to participate, maybe there's a way we can work on that. I'm curious if people have ideas for how they want to move forward with the stash challenge. But otherwise, that's going to be all for now. I hope to see you in a more timely fashion in the next month.